Hello and welcome to the Reason Roundtable. This is the podcast of free minds, free markets, and free takes, and I'm your host, Peter Suderman. We have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about why the libertarians were right about just about everything, now more than ever. And we're going to talk about Donald Trump's incompetence problems and how they compare with the Biden administration, plus reader question about libertarian lady book clubs, for Katherine mostly, and whether RFK is right that sugar is poison, red food dye is the devil, and what Maha really is. Stock up on Skittles now, folks. Joining me to talk about all of this are my illustrious colleagues, Katherine Mangu-Ward, Nick Gillespie, and Matt Welch. Everybody say hello.
Howdy.
Hey, Matt.
Matt.
Hey, Peter.
Matt.
Whatever. Whoever.
We're just having our own conversation.
Hello to all
Nick,
you.
Yeah.
You guys are in New York, so you can say hey to each other.
It's Earl Weaver all the way down, but hello.
All right. Happy Monday to everyone who made it through the White House Correspondents' Dinner weekend in Washington, D.C., and even more so, if you don't live here and didn't even know it was happening, good parties though. Lots of podcasters. Before we get to our own podcast party, question, do you want to work on the Reason Roundtable? We are looking for a producer. If you are a detail-oriented, creative podcast fanatic who wants every Monday to be a happy Monday, apply today by going to reason.com/jobs. You can also find the link in our show notes. Okay, I want to start this week with a proposition. Libertarians were right and are right about everything. And people are finally starting to catch up, even if they don't know it. In particular, libertarians were right about tariffs in the economy. One poll recently found that Trump's tariffs are less popular than the Spanish Inquisition. You guys remember the old Monty Python sketch? No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. The comfy pillows? No? I don't know.
Yes.
Anyway. Right. Okay. So that is especially true of independents. Recent New York Times Siena poll found that the president's pursuit of widespread tariffs was opposed by 55% of voters, including 63% of independents. And poll after poll, this is not just New York Times, poll after poll shows that the economy went from Trump's strongest issue to his weakest almost entirely because of tariffs. So, Nick, we talked about this a little bit before the show last week, and you brought up some history here. It's not just tariffs. It's not just Trump and the economy. It's not just the deportations and executive overreach that we're going to talk about a little bit more here.
It's not COVID. Just the light blue suit at the Pope's funeral, which is almost as enraging as him ordering his steak well done with ketchup on the side.
That what libertarians were that might be something libertarians were wrong about, fashion. But anyway, right, COVID, the Obama stimulus, the Iraq war, you go back to the biggest moments in political history, the biggest controversies over the last 20, 25 years. And the consensus now on so many of those kind of aligns with libertarian ideas and ideals.
Totally.
But people aren't becoming libertarian. Why is that?
Well, not in name, but I think in deed or in temperament, I think. Also when you throw in stuff like drug legalization, attitudes towards immigrants as opposed to immigration policy necessarily, gay marriage and a variety of lifestyle issues, the world has become much, much more libertarian since Reason started publishing in 1968. The question is, do we get credit for this? And what role have we played either at Reason or more broadly in kind of creating a looser, a more tolerant, a richer America? And I think it's substantial. I don't worry too much about. Well,
there's that old line, right, that you can accomplish anything in Washington so long as you don't take credit. And there's a way in which that's true about libertarians.
Yeah, or as Reagan used to say, there's no me in leadership or something like that, but there is an I, and obviously they want to get credit for it. The important thing, and I think one of the reasons why libertarians don't get enough credit is that we do not have a reliable spokesman or a set of people within either the Republican or Democratic Party. I think if you talk to most people, we're getting back to that moment. We saw this during the Obama years and certainly the Bush years as well. People saying oh yeah, libertarian. I'm libertarian on a bunch of stuff, and that's important. And that's meaningful, but we don't have a reliable person in the Republican or Democratic Party saying, yeah, I'm libertarian, and this is why this is good, and this is where we're heading. I mean, we have people like Rand Paul to a certain degree, and he's reemerging as a national spokesman. So I care less about, whether or not people acknowledge they're being libertarian. I care more about whether we're moving in that direction. And I think we are because of our consistency. And also it's not accidental consistency. It's not like, it's not like we're saying, oh, well, we need the state to be massively involved in everything we're doing in this one area, but out of this, I think people will come around to the idea that you don't want socially conservative people running your social life. You don't want fiscally liberal people running your economic life. You want, free minds and free markets across the board. And issue after issue, it comes up like, yeah, we know what we're doing here.
So, Matt, it's not just tariffs. It's like every other issue. You've especially executive overreach right now. I mean, people are maybe still, kind of in favor of Trump's general approach to immigration, but they're looking at the deportations and some of the unlawfulness there and saying they don't like it, right? The New York Times Siena poll has his overall approval rating amongst independent voters at just 29%. So I've heard, co-wrote a book about independence. I think, what was the title? Declaration? Anyway, something, right?
Google it.
So, you are a credentialed expert on independence, right? Because you wrote a book. That's how you become an expert on things.
You become an expert by watching, alternative historians talk about stuff on podcasts. I think we've made that clear over the past 6
paths,
weeks.
Multiple, right? It's not just one path to expertise. It's
there's only one path.
Or the alternative historians, obviously here, right? But look, Matt, this is a thing that you have talked about for well over a decade, is that independents are important. They're a bellwether, and they are reacting a very particular way to Trump and the economy right now. Help us understand why.
Independents, as this was also the case with Joe Biden, they are a corrective mechanism on two-party politics. So I think both times Trump got elected, he was mostly at parity with independents. And then immediately that number went south. Same thing with Biden. Actually, Biden won pretty handily among independents in 2020, and then he plummeted in popularity among that cohort by 30 percentage points in 6 months. So independents are more of a swing vote, and this is people who self-describe, generally speaking. I can hear the people in the peanut gallery already saying, wow, there's no such thing as a true independent. They actually vote in a pretty reliable way. Pretty reliable, but not altogether reliable. And so if we are careening between two authoritarian-minded political parties, and we are, because we've been living, as George Will told me and Nick in 2014 or 15, we've been living through the authoritarian moment this past decade. I don't think it's a moment of triumphalism for libertarianism at all. Just looking around at the condition not only of our own country, which the government is doing way more than it was 10 years ago, and worse in many ways. But also we just disrupted the entire global trading order, which is going to needlessly impoverish a whole lot of people, or at least keep them from getting wealthier. That's a net real badness for freedom. Most of the freedom indices around the world have been trending in a negative direction in the last 10 years after pretty much uninterrupted positive growth for several decades beforehand. So I don't really cotton with the idea that it's like that. Independents right now are going to give first Trump a rebuke at the polls and his issues and his approach of that the ends justify the means. He thinks he can get away with that and run roughshod over due process. Americans are not going to sit and take that lying down, I don't think. So he will get that in the polls, and then the next step will be Republicans will lose at the midterms next time around, and the majorities in Congress will probably dissipate, one or two of them. So that is a corrective mechanism. It doesn't mean that cohort is suddenly getting more libertarian on a variety of things. Maybe they will a little bit, maybe they won't. We don't know. It's kind of up in the air. Usually, the more that Trump in particular overreaches, which he likes to do, he enjoys it, the more that there's a reaction against it. This happened with both immigration and trade last time in his first administration. He's doing much more on both this time around. So maybe people will kind of boomerang in the opposite direction. I don't know how stable that is in the long term. So I don't think this is a time for us to spike the football. We're careening towards a debt crisis. So that seems more bad to me than a bunch of people on Substacks making proclamations that they were mean to libertarians 15 years ago. Maybe they shouldn't have been.
We'll get to that in just a minute. So look, I take your point. If this is not a libertarian moment on policy in so many ways, the trajectory is not towards a sort of much more libertarian world, especially in economic policy. But if you look at the animating concerns in American politics today, tariffs, the economy, deportations, executive power, and overreach, it sounds an awful lot like the table of contents to Reason magazine, and people are reacting negatively to non-libertarian policy in a way that, like, they're finding out what happens when you don't follow our advice and saying, hey, that sucks. This is not the world we want to live in. And that's a lot of what I'm saying. Katherine, what do you think about all this? Like, do you feel like there's at least, like, to me, like, even in the last week or two, it just sort of feels like people are realizing that, like, the Trump MAGA worldview, especially when it comes to tariffs, but also a lot of other stuff, like, they're realizing that goes way too far. That was not the corrective we needed, even though maybe we did need a corrective to the Biden era.
Yeah, I think the problem is the best case for libertarianism has always been the stuff that people take for granted. So the kind of vaguely neoliberal, global, open order, to the extent that people did not associate that with libertarianism, but instead just saw that as the kind of baseline of the modern world, that was our biggest win. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, the libertarians have been in charge for too long idea, which I was originally allergic to. It actually turned out we were in charge all that time, in a way, in the sense that we did have a decades-long radical opening of markets and of kind of movement of peoples, with some hiccups, to be sure. And unfortunately, that era is over, or at least is in peril right now. So I think our best chance for winning was always just doing stuff that nobody noticed. And that scheme is not working anymore, thanks to Donald Trump. So I'm glad that somebody has noticed that free trade is good. You do see these numbers in the polls, even...
Wait, if our best case was doing things that people didn't notice, and you're glad that people have noticed
but
it,
they only
right?
noticed after it's too late, right? Like, it was like it became a thing and it was already lost. And so I am worried about that. It could be regained. This could be a hiccup, and then it'll just be, hey, what have you done for me lately? Global order of openness, and there'll be some squabbles there, but I'm not sure.
I disagree with that framing of things, because the battle for free trade was an absolute battle. I mean, it's tariffs started declining after World War II, but especially in the 80s and 90s, there were constant fights. And if you go back and look at Issues of Reason, it's all about making the case for a couple of things, including lower tariffs, lower trading barriers and things like that, but also pushing back on the idea, this was ascended in the 80s, that the U.S. needed industrial policy, just like Japan's, because Japan had figured it out and it had beaten all the markets. And it's like, we constantly said no to that. We constantly said yes to trade. I think when you look at other aspects of what we were talking about, being anti-war, anti-bailouts, I can remember being in the Reason offices. Matt, I'm pretty sure you were there. Katherine, you may have been as well, when the Republican-led Congress shut down the bailouts that George Bush was pushing very heavily in the fall of 2008. And it was amazing, because it looked like it was going to pass, then it didn't. And people like the Wall Street Journal were denouncing free market nihilists who were, refused to do the right thing. We were anti-war, we were anti-bailout, we were anti-lockdown. And while we're not pro-Trump, we also weren't in favor of pants wetting when he won the first time or the second time. So I think we should take credit for the things that we're doing, and the ideas that we've been pushing. And I agree with Matt, you could make a case that the world is worse now than it was a decade ago, when the New York Times Magazine talked about, has the libertarian moment finally arrived? We know that it didn't. But by the same token, we, through repetition, political revolts and political revolutions and evolutions don't happen overnight. They happen over time. And I think as people come around, whether they're eggheads on Substack, issuing decades late apologies, or politicians starting to figure out like, oh, maybe I should do free trade. Oh, and by the way, like occupational licensing is a dud. We should get rid of that. Zoning, we should be rethinking. We should be into permissionless innovation or various things that we've championed. I think, I see nothing but green shoots going forward, because I don't think Trump is going to be able to pull this back and then pretend that he did it right. And nobody forgets how bad Biden was and the Democrats were in trying to control every aspect of our lives for the 4 years that they were in power.
I don't disagree with your story, but I also, again, I just think in the last, that story is 20 years old, right? The one you started with. And in those intervening decades, I think the extent to which people kind of just didn't look closely at the places where libertarians were winning, those were the successes for us. So the opening of trade, and also drug legalization, kind of that gay marriage, like those are things that were big fights and then quickly switched to baseline conditions. And I think our wins are when we establish the baseline conditions as the world that libertarians want, and we have to keep fighting for it. But when people pay attention to those, if they think about it, they're against it. And I don't, we could fill hours of podcast with why that is the
I
case,
agree with what you're saying. I mean, and I guess then another way of saying it is like, this is a great time to really push back on the idea that somehow global trade has made us poor, that somehow, that what Trump is fundamentally arguing is that if you have a trade deficit with a country, they're ripping you off. That is mental. I mean, it is so freaking stupid and incompetent and just wrong. It's a good time to rehearse the benefits of global trade. And also to point out that people in America aren't living worse lives because they don't have to work in coal mines and factories anymore. In fact, they're living better lives where they get to choose their meaning and they need to build that meaning. And we can help with that too.
I think part of the story here is that I'm seeing is that Democrats are co-opting our language. And that doesn't mean that they are necessarily pushing our policies, although in some cases they are. Matt Welch, I'm going to say the words abundance agenda. Ew. Yep, just to see your face, because I know you love it when I say abundance agenda. But
I just hope they're giving you a cut of the proceeds, because that
book hit
would be
number
the
one.
only thing that would explain this. But go on.
Number one on the bestseller charts this week. Kind of amazing. Everybody wants abundance. You have Pete Buttigieg, who's out there giving interviews in which he is talking about how the Democratic policy agenda is there to give people freedom. If you look at freedom, like that's the goal, is give people freedom. I'm not saying I agree with his take on freedom and what it means, but he is saying that's what policy is there to do. The abundance agenda is they're saying they'll tell you, oh, look, this is kind of primarily a progressive critique and we want government to be good at things. But their fundamental argument, like if you boil it down, is there's too much regulation, too much red tape, and government has not been good at things. That sounds pretty libertarian to me. And so what you see, I think, is that all of the people who understand that things are not going well, the people who are not diehard MAGA, types, who are not just totally in the tank for Donald Trump or for the Biden version of the Democratic Party, you see that they are drifting towards a kind of libertarian-tinged, libertarian-inflected worldview that is about freedom, that is about deregulation, that is about abundance in energy and building stuff. Matt, do you think that that's wrong? Do you think that there's going to be a sort of a counter movement to what we have seen over the past couple of administrations, the kind of governance that has frustrated people? Do you think that there is going to be one and that libertarians are going to have some influence over it, or libertarian ideas anyway?
I think your story would be a lot cooler, bro, if there were elected Democrats doing any of this.
Mm.
Yeah. Like
the chattering classes strike again.
Who is the elected Democrat doing this? Anywhere. I'm sure there's one. I'm sure there's three. Okay, we got one who has some.
We like the Jared Polis.
Why do you want to trigger the Jared Polis haters to come for us again?
They're going to come for us.
We don't like everything he's
doing.
Go
read Nick's
That's
last
not
piece.
A total endorsement.
But no, seriously, like it's again, I will tap the sign. I'm always happy when opinion writers come to epiphanies 15 years too late. It's great. But there are more. I mean, look at how power is actually exercised in the world. Look how political popularity is happening on the left. Who's going to Coachella? Is it Jared Polis? Is it Ezra Klein? Is he like doing ayahuasca with a Ross Douthat hat and like talking about abundance?
Yes to this question.
So
like,
I'm pretty sure that Ezra Klein is in fact going to music festivals and doing.
No, it's like
but you're talking about Bernie Sanders and
Bernie
AOC.
Sanders and AOC
right?
are the people who are drawing crowds on the left right now. To the extent that anyone's paying attention to Democrats, in some sense, would be wisest simply to do what they can to help individuals whose rights are being transgressed by the Trump administration, a la Chris Van Hollen going down to El Salvador prisons. I think that's a correct thing to do in dealing with residents who live under your own jurisdiction. But the Democrats who are drawing crowds are left progressive Democrats who have nothing to do with the abundance agenda, who've been saying in Bernie Sanders' case, several decades.
It's like 1 year of his year is 100 years for the rest of us.
I think that's his drag game.
Yeah.
Bernie decades, it's his based Mike Lee burner account, has been saying
Bernie
that
decades is my favorite bowling alley.
International trade is a race to the bottom. He's been saying that for 50 years, getting applause lines on the left and almost winning the presidential nomination twice as a Democratic socialist. So, again, neat abundance agenda. I'm rooting for them to have more influence. And when I look at how power is actually being exercised, including by the previous administration, right? They could have come into office after Trump and said, oh boy, maybe we did too much with the whole using executive authority. That would have been a pretty rational response. Instead, they talked about, didn't quite do, packing the Supreme Court. They rattled against them in State of the Union addresses. Biden in his last days said, screw it. The ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, is now law. They just sort of waved a magic wand on student loans. None of this was abundance agenda. And I repeat, absolutely none of it was. So I'm rooting for them. I think that they are not statistically significant factor at all.
But you got Buttigieg out there. Who knows if he will become more than like Andrew Yang or something like that. But there's also
South
people
Bend,
like
Indiana
Shapiro.
is gonna rock now.
Yeah, but there's also people like Shapiro in Pennsylvania who is not, and Polis and whatnot. None of these people are libertarian in the way that we would want them to be, but they are moving towards a center where they are talking about, trying to empower people more and to have the government do less direct mucking up in the economy. So it's not everything, but it's something.
We got two.
And Fetterman. So that means we've got 4.
You also have.
God damn it.
You also have some people on Substack, as you have mentioned. There is Noah Smith, who is an economics commentator who came from mainstream media. He worked for Bloomberg for a while, now has a very popular Substack. This guy is not a libertarian, have many disagreements with him, but he's also pretty smart, love his science fiction recommendations. And he tweeted within the last week or two, quote, I owe libertarians a partial apology for the years I spent bashing them as a grad student. Katherine, do you accept the apology?
No.
And who else owes libertarians an apology?
First of all, never accept anyone who is offering you a partial apology. Just, that's a flat no. Like, you're not that sorry that I'm not that accepting of your apology. I think I do think what it points to is there's a decent sized class of people who really, really, really are super comfortable just casually hating on libertarians, and that is the sign of kind of membership in the intellectual class as a broad category. I mean, I can't count the number of times that I've been in groups where people don't know what I do, and they just say the word libertarian or capitalism
it's
or
the L slur.
Ayn Rand with the tone of voice that implies like there is simply no thinking person who would for 1 second believe any of this nonsense. And so I don't want us to overestimate the extent to which the Noah Smith partial apology matters at all. I think it is extremely unfashionable to be libertarian amongst the smarty smart pantses and the sort of vaguely influential people of this world. Maybe that doesn't matter because who cares, as Matt rightly notes, about the smarty smart pantses. But like that apology is itself just signaling about how he is still very much not a libertarian and shares the intellectual class's disdain for libertarians. And I don't think that we should get confused about that.
All right. So speaking of the smarty smart pantses and influencers in this world, there is a whole cohort of like tech and finance adjacent business guys who turned towards Trump. Most of them sort of started their careers as Democrats or something like Democrats, and they were increasingly over the past couple of years kind of pro MAGA and pro Trump. And you have seen, I think, at least some of them start to shift away from that just in the past couple of weeks. There was a headline in New York Magazine that I don't have in front of me, but it was just something like, I had no idea that this guy could be so crazy. What they are seeing is that the Trump administration is just sort of shambolic and chaotic, right? And you see this in so many realms. I mean, even in the tariffs, right? They are already signaling that they are willing to do a bailout to farmers because the tariffs are hurting American farmers in exactly the way they promised it wouldn't, exactly the way that it happened last time. If you remember, the bailouts for farmers during the first Trump term were almost equal to the amount of tariff revenue that we got, right? So it was just basically a wash when you did that. You have this with Russia as well, right? You got Trump saying, Vladimir, stop. Promising it'll all be, he'd promised the war would be over on day one. Now it's going to be 2 weeks and 2 weeks and 2 weeks, right? And just all of this, right? You see so many examples of the Trump administration just kind of not really being able to get their stuff together. And I think like this is something that is turning people again towards a kind of a somewhat more libertarian worldview because like maybe you like the stuff that Trump said he was going to do, but even Trump is not able to actually effectuate any of this stuff in a way that makes any kind of sense. Nick, am I totally crazy here? Is this like is
yes,
this a factor?
You are. Now, what about what are you talking
about? I shouldn't have set that up that way.
Yeah. No, I before I tend to do this on Mondays. I checked with the St. Louis Fed. Their uncertainty and economic policy index for the U.S. It is now yet again still above what happened when COVID hit, when the financial crisis hit, when 9/11 happened. Trump has injected a massive amount of uncertainty into the daily political process, and that is terrible for economic policy. It's terrible for economic growth. I think his disapproval ratings, and they are, his approval rating is tanking, and these things are related. People want the idea that somebody who is in charge has some idea of what they're doing. And he does not seem to be able to do that. He has a bunch of incompetent people. Everybody knows that Pete Hegseth was over his head on Fox and Friends weekends, and now he's supposed to be in charge of dismantling the deep state. Which would be a great thing. Like, we need a Pentagon that actually is geared around, defending America and not doing a bunch of other crap or being a jobs program for, Northrop Grumman and, McDonnell Douglas and a bunch of other companies that probably don't even exist anymore. But we're not getting that. He can't get through the laws that he wants passed, the cuts that he wants passed, et cetera. So people are right to be upset, and it is going to shake out very badly, not just for us, like an economic reality, but for the Republicans, a good riddance. And then we get back to the first segment, which is like, what's going to replace it? And if the Democrats, and they might be able to do this, if they can cruise to midterm success with AOC, whatever her causes are now, that's bad news, because then we just go back to 2022 or 2020 or something like that. But hopefully that doesn't happen.
Well, I think also when we have this kind of chaotic situation, like, you see people passing through various ideological affiliations quite rapidly, right? And so you have the kind of like previously Democrat affiliated kind of good government liberal tech bros who have all swung like quite quickly through a very brief phase that looked like libertarianism maybe, and then landed in MAGA. They're going to swing back out because it's gross there, and unappealing to them.
Not all of them.
Well, but you leave some, you leave some men behind in each of these phases of the campaign. But for lots of them, whose primary motivating factor is like how can we make the economy work well, or at least that's one of their motivations, and how particularly can we make the economy work well for my business interests, which is a totally legitimate thing to be motivated by. They're going to swing back out, and I think the challenge for us is, there are a lot of other people adjacent to our world, in the chattering class who are just against things. They're heterodox in the sense that they no longer want to go along with what they perceive to be the liberal consensus in the media and academia, but they don't necessarily have a place to go toward. And I think that's what's, libertarians and also the AOCs of the world, like they have an ideological anchor. Like we have a place where we're trying to get. And some people will find that appealing, but some people will just swing to nihilism. And I think that's actually the real, even though in many ways I am attracted to nihilism on every front, I think that it's actually not good for people to just totally lose faith that comprehensible political change is possible. And I do think we're probably right on the cusp of that for a new batch of people.
They're nihilists, Lebowski. They believe in nothing. No, I mean, I think that's kind of correct. At the same time, it's not just economics. If you look at what animates a lot of the most prominent folks sort of in the tech right, the people who've swung towards MAGA, who are well-known and notable, yes, they care a lot about the economy, but they also care a lot about wokeness and some of the cultural issues. So I'm going to argue with myself just a little bit here and say, sure, Trump is very incompetent in a lot of ways. I think that's a totally, I will defend that argument. At the same time, it's a lot harder to make that argument just straightforwardly on its own, given that we had the Joe Biden administration in which we had a president who couldn't take meetings after 4 p.m. and could barely remember the pre-prepared answers to submitted questions from his own cabinet secretaries, right? The most notable moment at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, I think, was when Alex Thompson got up on stage in front of the whole Washington press corps and said, we bear some responsibility for faith in the media being at such lows. I say this because acknowledging errors builds trust and being defensive about them further erodes it. We should have done better. And so you had this kind of conspiracy or at least a kind of tacit understanding between the Democratic left, the progressive left, and the whole sort of mainstream media apparatus to cover up the fact that the previous president was incompetent in a different way. And that was a real problem.
What kind of response did that get, Peter?
I actually haven't. I was not at the dinner, so I've only seen the clip of him saying it. But it has been passed around a bunch, and I think people are sort of looking at that and saying, I don't know that everyone wants to acknowledge it or sort of say, yes, that is going to be our sort of animating force. At the same time, I do think that there is at least more openness to the idea that they kind of blew it than there was 2 years ago.
Sounds like a partial apology to me.
Yeah. Matt Welch, what do you think of this? How do you think about the competence problems in both parties and sort of how Trump sort of plays off of the Biden incompetence issues?
On the Alex Thompson thing, narrowly and briefly, he was good on this issue, did good reporting, as did the Wall Street Journal.
He took a lot of shit for reporting out a story that was obvious to everybody but the people in the tank for Biden.
And he was very fearless about it. And I would be a lot more impressed with the White House Correspondents' Dinner for inviting someone like him to make that kind of speech if the Democrats would have won in 2024. I think there's a lot of results-based, let's be deep in our thoughts for 6 months and then revert back to normal. On the competence thing, I think Trump is more competent this time than last time in his first administration. I think by a lot. And I think a lot of what people are reacting to negatively, by people in this case, I mean civil libertarians largely, is that he's doing a lot of things all at once. And it's kind of hard to keep up. There are some aspects of it that are have a lot of messy competence and lack thereof. A lot of the Doge rollout just seems to be like shock and awe. I don't really know what's happening, and it's not being portrayed accurately by the people doing it. Obviously, Hegseth is overmatched.
He's about to become an adjective, right?
And arguably RFK Jr. has been a bit erratic. We might talk about that a little bit later. But I think that Trump has been it's been a lot more smooth rollout. At least he's been able to do more things. For me, what we're seeing now is the inevitable unpredictability, whimsical nature of great man theory in action. I remember the great doctor of literature, Nick Gillespie, saying in 2016, maybe it was a pre-election preview, kind of who you're voting for thing, where he said the worst single thing about Donald Trump, 2016, is that he believes in and he's an avatar of great man theory, and that is antithetical not just to libertarian but also conservative views, and that way lies madness. And I think that was actually a very shrewd prediction of how things would go. Now we just sort of have great manness as the wallpaper of the entire conservative movement. It's like, you didn't apologize to Trump enough. You've been disrespectful. It's been all of these things.
Yeah,
so,
think of how he would have talked down to Anne Frank. You know, I mean, that's like, or the kid cutting the lawn in front of the White House. You know, he takes it personally.
Right now, national, both industrial policy, tariff policy, global tariff is all in the office of one guy. What happens when you have one very powerful and very gifted politician, as Dan Tarantino over at Two-Way points out, a Democratic guy who was also early on Biden being too old, is like, he's a generational talent in politics. You have to give him credit for that, even if you hate his guts. So what happens when you have a great man theory? You're based on the whims of that great man. You have people who are executing kind of in fear, trying to translate what they think that he wants to know. There was a piece, I think, in the Atlantic yesterday, could have been somewhere else, and I'm sorry, I don't have it on the tip of my tongue, but where there was a quote from an anonymous White House staffer saying, well, when he says that he wants something 2 times, that's when we really know we need to do it. Like, is this how we're running policy? Yes, that is how we're running policy. And what else happens when everything happens at a great man, at a monarchical figure? Well, clever people try to be on this side of his ear and saying, oh, really, we're doing tariffs because we want to reduce tariffs. And then this person says, oh, we're doing this because we're going to get rich and replace the tax code. And everyone is trying to sort of game him, interpret him. It's all bad. It's central planning at a single person. It's very monarchical, and it's against what we should be doing and against what the intuition of the American project has been from the beginning. And I think that is those are the seeds of his eventual demise. And then someday, probably only after they too lose, Republicans will say, oh yeah, maybe we shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of? Star Wars. The Star Wars prequels in particular, which started with a trade war. That's the opening scene of The Phantom Menace. And then Revenge of the Sith, the third of the prequels, which is in theaters this weekend again, actually did surprisingly well.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Star Wars Christmas special.
What's the most famous line in the prequels? It's, this is how liberty dies, to thunderous applause. But that's the difference here, and that's the thing that gives me hope, is that it is not dying. It is not dying to thunderous applause. In fact, it's dying to terrible poll numbers. And you see in that New York Times Siena poll in particular, but also all of the other polling, you see that people are reacting to what they see as executive overreach. They believe that Trump is going too far. This isn't everyone. This isn't the core of the MAGA movement. They're still with him. But you see that people are saying, look, this one man should not have all of that power.
I think let's make a prediction, or I'm going to make a prediction that we'll know what's going to happen over the rest of the Trump years when the tax cuts and the extension of the tax cuts comes to play. Because at this point, Trump his support is degrading very quickly, rapidly. He already, Matt, you saying he's competent, but was the continuing resolution to spend more money than God? Was that part of his plan, or did he have to concede that? But the second shoe here is the extension of the tax cuts. And if he does not get a clean extension, I think it's over. Like, then he's going to be like in his first term, where he's going to be working much more in the center than he came into office talking about.
All right, you know what else is over? This segment, we're going to go to an ad. We're going to smoothly roll out of this so that we can do some more things. Hey, Reason Roundtable listeners, Peter Suderman here. Do you know a student looking for a transformative opportunity that supports the foundations of a free society? Reliance College invites students aged 16 to 24 to the 2025 Great Connection Seminar in Chicago from July 26th to August 2nd. This year's theme, Reason and Free Will, dives into timeless ideas from writers such as Thomas Jefferson, Ayn Rand, and Aristotle. Students can sharpen critical thinking skills in small dynamic groups, developing the intellectual tools needed to thrive in a free society. Outside the classroom, they will explore Chicago's vibrant culture, touring museums, trying improv comedy, and building lifelong personal connections. Parents, this program equips students to think, reason, and act independently. Go to reliancecollege.org/reason to learn more and apply. Registration is just $800, including room and board for the full week with scholarships available. Don't miss out. Visit reliancecollege.org/reason to learn more and apply. That's reliancecollege.org/reason to learn more and apply. All right, our listener question comes from Susan, who writes, I was distressed to hear on your last podcast that I make up fully 1/3 of the podcast's female listenership. I think it's a little higher than that. Although I have contributed to an increase in female libertarians by birthing and educating one, I would like to do more. I can only indirectly proselytize because I'm an academic at a large state university and I need to keep my job. So I was thinking I could choose a subtly libertarian novel for my all-female book group. They're not into sci-fi, so no moon is a harsh mistress. And Ayn Rand is also out because, well, she said subtle. Katherine, what would you recommend? Let's just say, for listeners who don't know, Katherine is like a book club collector. She has more book clubs, I think, than Elon Musk has kids. So tell us what you want to recommend here.
And I did all my book clubs the natural way, just for the record. So first of all, I do want to say I was wrong. There are lots of lady listeners to this podcast. I want lady libertarians to feel seen and welcomed. So hi, everybody. This is a great question. I love this question because, first of all, book clubs are great. Second, there are so many ways to do this. That also gives me an opportunity to point out, I have behind me here, all of my books on my little shelf are by ladies. They're all lady libertarian books. And so if you can see those, I don't know if you can. There's lots of good little Easter eggs there for you. I have two recommendations. One, I think book clubs really underappreciate the possibility of reading just a short story sometimes. People are busy. People got stuff to do. And to give people the chance to read a short story. So I would recommend, if your book club is interested in a short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas by Ursula Le Guin. It's in this collection here, which is called The Unreal and the Real. But you can get it online as well, just written in kind of a parable style, and certainly enough to talk about over a couple of bottles of wine. If you do want a whole book, I'm going to give you Octavia Butler. Technically sci-fi, but it will for sure fly in terms of your book club because it has all of the other hallmarks that like a nicey lady book club would like. It is by a queer Black woman. It is speculative fiction, really, as opposed to just science fiction. We just have one little odd twist in the rules of the universe. But I would recommend Kindred, which is a good standalone from her. This will trip no one's alarms for libertarian propaganda, and yet it is for sure a book about freedom and what it means to be a sort of person with a free mind in an unfree place. So those are my two recommendations, but I have, infinity more. So if anybody wants to talk about them, I don't know if, Peter, are you going to ask other people? Because I don't want to jump on the one that Nick will recommend, but... What
am I going to recommend?
You're going to recommend...
Let's find out what Nick's going to recommend.
Nick's going to recommend...
If Nick doesn't recommend it.
Julia. He's going to recommend Julia.
I was not going to because I took seriously the prohibition on sci-fi. And I consider that science fiction.
Is 1984 science fiction? I guess.
Yeah.
But it is also for sure going to qualify in the, it is literary enough and no mixes of rocket fuels are described.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is the allergy.
Disappointment to you.
That is the allergy for like lady book clubs. Like if there's a point where like you're getting into the physics of like how they got from this planet to that planet, I get it. Some people just aren't interested in that. I think Julia, the retelling of George Orwell's 1984, does not violate that prohibition, and it's also an incredible, subtle way to bring your book club into some libertarian energy.
Nick, what non-science fiction are you going to recommend?
Okay, I've got a bunch. Self-Care by Lee Stein, who I've talked about that book at least twice on this. I did an interview with her and the author of another novel that I would recommend. And Self-Care, just very quickly, is set at a woman's wellness startup right after the 2016 election. It came out in 2020. It is very funny. Lee Stein is not libertarian, but this opens up a discussion of entrepreneurship as well as kind of individualism that is just brilliant and super funny. I did a recent interview with her and Julius Taranto, who wrote a book called How I Won a Nobel Prize, which is set at a fictional university that is funded by a billionaire and populated only by faculty who have been canceled elsewhere. Also hilariously funny, not explicitly libertarian, but opens up things. And I'm assuming that that Susan might be hanging out with other academics. It's very funny, and it attacks both the right and the left in equal measure. The Book of Ayn, this contradicts the no Ayn Rand, please, but Lexi Friedman's novel.
Ban on science fiction.
I know, yeah. So, but this is a parody of a writer who gets canceled and then falls in briefly with an Ayn Rand group in New York and then goes off to the Mediterranean. It has bizarre sexual and personal adventures. Very, very funny and crypto-libertarian, again, by somebody who's not libertarian. And then my final one, and again, in keeping with the idea that we're talking to an academic at a large state university, I will point out very briefly, last night I watched the terrible early 90s movie Sneakers with Robert Redford. And it opens with the Redford character and his friend hacking into computers and doing nefarious things in the 60s. And the school they go to is only identified by Robert Redford's jacket that just says U on it, like big U for university. But university. Yeah, it's just a big university, right? It's like the university.
We should
of
all say on this podcast now, my voice is my passport, so that people can
thank you very
whatever
much
they
so.
want.
Exactly. But The Big U by Neil Stephenson, I think it's his first published book. It's certainly, if not the first, it's one of the very early ones. And it is set at a large dystopian, massive state university. Everybody I know who has read it, who went to anything other than a small liberal arts college, is absolutely convinced that it is about their school and their experience at a large state university, and it is not. But
this one is also, in this vein, a little more heavy-handed, but Lionel Shriver's, I think, most recent or second most recent, Mania, which is also set at a university and is part of
and newscasting and whatnot. Yeah, Mania is a great book. It was highly controversial, but fantastic.
It shows its cards pretty hard. It's
very anti-woke, right?
If the letter writer wants subtle, Lionel Shriver's Mania ain't it, but Lionel Shriver's The Mandibles, which I've recommended 1,000 million times on this podcast, would be.
Yeah. All right. I don't think we need any more book recommendations here. That's a lot, and they're all great. But you can have more. Have more.
Sorry, Matt.
All right, Matt. Go ahead.
You don't even read fiction.
Give us a quick
You don't even read fiction.
Oh, I get the quick thing. Too Loud a Solitude by Bohumil Hrabal. Read it. There's my quick recommendation.
That's a good one.
Hey, that's a good recommendation. All right, let's move on here. We're going to talk about Robert F. Kennedy and the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again. Last week, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. declared that sugar is poison. Also said he has an understanding with major food producers to remove red dye number 3 ahead of schedule, along with some other artificial food dyes that have long been the target of MAHA. So I think there are a couple of ways to kind of think about what's going on with the MAHA movement. First, it is an online cultural movement. It's based on a rejection or a kind of a skepticism of mainstream health and diet advice, particularly. Second, it's a political movement, and it's linked closely to Donald Trump, though it's not just about Donald Trump. And third, its cult of personality specifically revolves around RFK Jr. And I think there's a lot to appreciate about the cultural movement and the kind of DIY nature about it. Maybe there's some things to appreciate about the political movement insofar as it acts as a necessary reset to a long history of public health failures. But the closer it gets to Trump and RFK, more crankish and cultish it looks. Nick, I want to ask you first because you are, I think hope I'm not revealing too much here, but you're like a health optimizer, right? Like you have gone through sort of different sort of ways of thinking about like how to sort of diet, health rate, all of these things. Like this is something you think about. But I gather you are also not really an RFK fan. You're not part of the MAHA movement in a traditional sense here. So what do you think about all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very polite way of saying that I am a dietary crank and that I like extreme diets. The more
Put you
weird,
in charge
the better.
Of HHS.
I would eat.
I just want to take
all...
a minute and describe a food that I have seen Nick eat during one of his diets, which was just a slice of turkey with mayonnaise squeezed down the middle, and then the turkey wrapped around the mayonnaise, and then just
culinary delight.
It's
that
a
was
sandwich.
during the Atkins period, I think. It was a long time ago,
and
to be
you
fair.
never really get out of the Atkins period fully, but no, there were KFC had a sandwich that was two slabs of chicken acting as the bun on a sandwich made of bacon. And that is my maha. That is what they took from us, Peter. No, I love crank diets. I've eaten vegan. I've eaten macrobiotically. I've eaten extreme Atkins, keto, etc. And I love all of that. I don't think that the maha movement is a corrective to insane dietary rules that ultimately get shoved down your throat by the government and fail at doing that. It is merely the latest instance of that. And when Kennedy says that he has reached an understanding with major cereal producers, so that Fruit Loops will be as dull and gray looking as they are in Canada, he actually hasn't done anything yet. He's had that kind of telepathic communication he's had with Sirhan, saying that, I didn't really kill your father. I mean, it's not actual law or anything like that, okay? The Maha movement is as bad in the way that it tends to present itself as anything that Michelle Obama was trying to do when she was making school lunches even less edible than they already were. So I'm down on the Maha movement, not because it's DIY. I like that. Not because it challenges conventional wisdom. I like that. But because it is crazy and absolutely out to lunch, pardon the pun, in terms of actually following up on anything medical. It is the worst kind of, goop style. Gwyneth Paltrow, who I'll mention in passing, CNN actually had a headline saying that Gwyneth Paltrow is back to eating cheese and carbs. This is why CNN is no longer a leading network, probably.
Was it breaking? Was it like breaking?
Yeah, pretty much, right. Yeah, they pulled Jake Tapper off to bring in Sanjay
they put a
Gupta
countdown
or
timer
something.
on that one.
Yeah. But it is, it is lifestyle that is being raised to theology and injected into politics. It's bad news. Most of the claims about seed oils and about colored dyes and stuff like that are just completely fanciful, as are all the ideas that if you eat this one thing, you're going to live to 100 without dandruff and with, great erections. That, it's all bunk. And you should have absolute freedom to eat whatever you want, needless to say.
Katherine, there's a sort of aspect of this that is quite gendered, right? So there's the lift bros and the sort of protein maxers, but there's also a sort of a female aspect of this that is concerned about sort of particular health stuff. I think some of the seed oil stuff kind of crosses over. But then you have these things that are sort of Maha adjacent or sort of Republican lady adjacent. Like there was an article in The Guardian recently that was like complaining that right-wing female influencers were telling young women to be thin, fertile, and Republican. And then you had this former Daily Wire podcaster, Brett Cooper, who's very popular, tweeted, "Thin, fertile, and Republican sounds hot, LOL." But you're like a lift bro right now, Katherine, is that right? So like, how do you kind of navigate this and see the kind of gendered aspect of this? Like, how do you relate to this? And what's your favorite way to deadlift?
Yeah, I want to start by just saying we have an awesome piece coming up in the next issue by Elizabeth Nolan Brown that really gets into the MAGA of it all in terms of, or the MAHA of it all, rather, in terms of the health flux that we are in right now, and that piece required me to make a copy editing decision about how we style the phrase protein maxing. It has 2 X's, in case anyone's interested, and a hyphen if it's adjectival. So that is a thing that happened in my life last week. And yes, I do even lift, bro, but we're not going to talk about that anymore on this podcast. I think that actually this ties into what I was saying before, where there's a point in the chaos where all you know is what you're against, and it's hard to know what you're for. And if you don't have something that you're for, you become a nihilist. And that is how I feel about the nutrition discourse. I don't trust anyone. I don't believe anything. I am now just fully out here, like, I've become I just do my own research, bro. And what this takes you to is a place where you're kind of like grumpy all the time, right? Like everyone around me is talking about how much.
Not if you're getting your macros properly.
Everyone around me is talking about how much protein to eat and why red dye is bad and all these kinds of things. And it does feel like actually no one knows what they're talking about. And if no one knows what they're talking about, that is always a good sign that the government is not in a good place to act. And I think that is the thing, is like, if we are in the place where no one knows anything, then we should be in the place where no one is legislating anything. I am old enough to remember when Republicans were against job owning 5 minutes ago from the Twitter files, from COVID. And now we have RFK Jr. saying we have an understanding with a bunch of large corporations that will restrict Americans' choices. I'm still against it, even when the teams are switched.
Yeah, so let's talk just a little bit more about, I think you're right, like to think about this as a no one knows anything. It's not quite that no one knows anything. It's that health knowledge is not generally applicable because people are different and bodies are different. And so, yes, there's all of this kind of, all of the MAHA movement is bound up in COVID and public health failures that were so apparent there. But it's also, I think, tied up in the rise of intense exercise culture, which is just inherently DIY and cobbled together. There's not like a formal program. And if there is, like, most people are not participating in it, right? You're Googling Mark Ripito and maybe you're getting a trainer, but it's a local guy at the local gym. Yeah, they're general standards, trends, kind of knowledge, right, that accumulate.
They're usually very
locally,
good at
right?
astrology as well.
Right. But you end up putting together your exercise and your diet routine yourself. And then there's this other thing that's going on, which is that food has become this major cultural signal, sort of a status thing, like, oh, I can afford to eat at these restaurants, but also just a kind of personal brand, almost like music was in the 1990s, right? Like in this, and that's partly because we've moved into this digital world where everybody has access to music, and like clothing matters less, right? But like these days, you're not a goth or a punk or a skater boy or whatever the hell it was, a metal guy. Yes, those people still exist, right? But like you are a paleo-vegan, gluten-free, no seed oils, beef tallow, protein max with like 7 X's, right? Like you are, because in the digital world, food and bodies are still things that like can be signals of who you are and the kind of lifestyle that you want to project that you are leading. They are also not things that you can get via streaming, right? This is not, they have become like the last thing that the digital world has not taken over. And so I think part of this is just tied up in like not everybody, but lots more people go to the gym now. And lots more people care about their diet and their health. And also, this is a thing that the online world can't kind of compress and synthesize for us. I don't know. Does this ring at all true to you, Matt Welch?
This is what I know. The most annoying thing about people who are interested in politics.
He's just thinking about those Quest bars he's going to have at the end of this. They're great.
The bars in Nick
don't really
Gillespie's
affect
drawer,
the hypoglycemic.
They had a life of their own. The most annoying thing about people who are gravitated towards politics, whether in government or trying to affect government, is that they want to use government power to tell you what to do and to limit your choices. The second most annoying thing is that they can't stop branding themselves as Maha moms or Crunchy Cons, shout out Rod Dreher 20 years ago, or Sam's Club Republicans, or South Park conservatives, or Abundance Agenda Democrats, or how about you're just a person? It's not that interesting. You're eating and exercising. High five. Great. Stop branding yourselves and pretending that it's interesting. Just be an individual human being. My God, you're embarrassing yourself, your family, and your country. Knock it off.
Everything's marketing now. That's my theory. There's actually I've gotten into the portion of the Substack universe where there are people who are like intense fans of specific consumer products brands, and their obsession is with the way that those brands are marketing themselves and like all the design choices and the specific words and language that they're using. And there's all these jokes about it, but they can't look away. And they treat this stuff like I treated comic books in the 1990s. And that is a good cue to move on to our final segment.
Can I go first?
What you watching, what you consuming, Katherine Mangu-Ward.
Okay, only because it's so on topic here. I had something prepared and I will talk about it next week. But what I want to talk about this week is on my way to work, there's always this lady who's selling empanadas out of the trunk of her car to all the guys that are the bike delivery guys. And I finally, despite the fact that I speak zero Spanish, summoned up my bravery to go buy an empanada from her, but we could not communicate, and so I just gave her money, and she gave me a packet of foil, and the thing that was inside it was an empanada filled with hot dogs, and it was incredible. It was so good. There was like spices on the hot dogs that made them both distinctively a hot dog and also the perfect empanada filling, and I just want to say that America is great. That's what I consumed. A hot dog empanada.
Did you weigh it?
On a street corner from a person with whom I did not share a common language.
Did you weigh the empanada and figure out how much?
No macros there, baby.
Oh, that's.
Did you put creatine powder on it now that you're lifting?
I just ate it.
And you know what I know.
Walking,
you know what I mean.
As
right?
God intended.
Yeah. Nick Gillespie.
I'm very much enjoying the new episode, the new season of Hacks on HBO or Max, whatever the fuck it's called now. It's
how many X's?
Yeah, they could probably go to 6 before people would cut them off. So, and it's with Jean Smart. She plays an older comedian and this season finally gets her shot at a late night show. It's a very good parody of show business, if we still need that. Plus her interaction with her younger writer who has brought her back from the dead, kind of, or exile living in Las Vegas to this, and then kind of tricked her way into being head writer of the show. It's a fantastic generational kind of show between kind of boomer culture and either young millennial or Gen Z culture. I like Hacks a lot. I look forward to it every Thursday when new episodes drop on HBO Max.
Matt Welch.
I read An Abundance of Caution, American Schools, the Virus, and a Story of Bad Decisions by David Zweig. Zweig was someone who came to my attention in May of 2020 because he wrote a piece for Wired, basically asking the question, hey, how is it that Europeans, countries mostly, have reopened their schools and concluded that the reopening of schools doesn't in any significant way transmit the COVID virus, even in those early days, and also the science, to the extent that they knew it, and could track it, seemed to show that, knock on wood, it wasn't really affecting kids, both in terms of lethality or transmission. And so, hey, we're going to do that. How come that was happening in Europe with studies associated with it and wasn't even being noticed in America? He wrote a follow-up piece in June of 2020 about that. This caught my attention then as someone who, like David Zweig, was a parent of 2 kids in the New York City public school system. And his question is worth answering, and that's what this book does at length. Basically, trying to see whose fingerprints were on the murder weapon of closing schools in the United States, pretty much uniquely compared to most of the rest of the developed world. It's an infuriating read. It is. I experienced definitely PTSD reading this. I mean, like not real PTSD, but you get what I'm saying. I remember things that were horrifying, and I shuddered all over again, saying, "Oh, I remember that New York Times story about the Israeli schools opening, and this thing about the Georgia summer camps." Just on and on and on and on. And most people I've seen who've been engaging with the book online, exact same thing, PTSD of this. I recommend it not just for people who are kind of pre-selected to agree with the thesis, but very specifically to those who are not. For those who react to the COVID era decisions by saying, hey, look, we did the best that we could with the knowledge that we had at the time. This is specifically, again, to the opening or non-opening of schools, is to me a very convincing documentary kind of TikTok about how that was not so and why that did not happen. In my view, he's a little bit easier on teachers' unions than I would have liked him to be. He points most of the fingers at the media and also at sort of elite public health. He gets into some really interesting philosophy of science stuff and evidence-based medicine. He's a mainstream journalist, Atlantic, New York Magazine, Wired, etc. And this whole process, and he had skin in the game and tried to open up like tent school at his school, and it talks about this a lot. Is just very interesting. This is until something else comes around. It's the definitive book, I think, on this really horrible policy era of it. David Zweig, An Abundance of Caution. Check it out.
Matt, your interview on the fifth column with him was fantastic as well. I would point people to that to follow up.
Yeah.
And also, if people have an unstoppable appetite for this sort of thing, and we should, I highly recommend Stephen Macedo and Francis Lee's In COVID's Wake, which also goes through and documents what was happening, because we've all forgotten. We've repressed it or blocked it out or have just simply forgotten. And that line that you're talking about, where it's like, well, we did the best we could, we were all going to muddy through. It's actually not true. We did a very poor job based on the knowledge and the choice set in front of us at almost any given point.
I'm just glad that you're taking an interest in books with the word abundance in the title.
I'm going to shoot you in the face.
Speaking of shooting people in the face, I saw The Accountant 2, which, like the first film, stars Ben Affleck, John Bernthal. Bernthal's in this movie a little bit more. And I can't overstate how much I am not kidding when I say that the premise of these movies is, what if being autistic made you really good at math and also John Wick? And this is a completely absurd premise for a movie, and it's not a very good movie. On the other hand, it's a really enjoyable film. This has an almost Roadhouse-like quality to it, in the sense that it's just completely ridiculous. It's kind of over the top. It doesn't really make any sense. It has joined together two things that should not go together, which is math and accounting and ridiculous murder. And I guess also Ben Affleck, who is our titular accountant, who is so autistic that he's both a mob and cartel accountant guy, and also an incredible badass who just knows how to fight and shoot his way out of any situation. This movie has less math than the first one and a lot more murder. There's just so much more murder in this movie and so much less accounting. But what makes it enjoyable is John Bernthal, who is one of the best kind of not quite a movie star types in Hollywood today. And the back and forth that he, as somebody who's sort of jovial and not autistic and kind of open and kind of wrestling with his feelings, as he's also a super assassin, by the way. Wrestling with his feelings as a middle-aged man who is a super assassin and wants a dog and doesn't really have connections in his life. And he and Ben Affleck, there's a bunch of scenes where they just sort of sit around and shoot the shit. They get into a bar fight for no reason. And you go back and you think, if those scenes weren't in the movie, would the plot make any less sense? Well, it doesn't make that much sense to begin with, but it wouldn't change anything. But those scenes actually kind of serve as the glue for this movie. It ends up being this great bro hangout movie between autistic, weird murder Ben Affleck and broy John Bernthal, who's just man, I want to get in touch with my feelings, and why aren't you letting me do that, autistic murder brother? If that sounds like a good movie to you, this is the best possible version of that movie. Again, not a great movie, but a very enjoyable one.
If you want that same thing, but with robots, I remind you again of my longtime favorite, the Murderbot series, soon coming to you as a
television show on Apple TV Plus.
It's the same plot, but what if?
Yeah, and I guess if you want it in your politics, it's also Donald Trump and Elon Musk, right?
Okay. Let's save that for another episode. That's our show. Before we go, Nick, do you want to tell us about any events coming up in the New York City area?
Please, in New York City, we've got on May 6th, I'm going to be talking with Robert Rosencrantz, who is a billionaire success story, plus the author of the forthcoming book, The Stoic Capitalist, which is very good. I'm going to be talking to him on May 6th. If you go to reason.com/events, you'll be taken to a page where you can get more details and buy tickets. And on May 21st, there's a Soho Forum debate on immigration, on whether or not we should have more immigration or less immigration, featuring Dave Smith and Alex Narasta, kind of going over that. I understand that it is sold out, but you can get on a wait list, and it's also going to be live streamed. But go to reason.com/events and get the info on those two things and much more.
That sounds great. As always, if you like this podcast, you can support us by going to reason.com/donate. That's reason.com/donate. And remember, if you want to work for the Reason Roundtable, work with the Reason Roundtable, we are looking for a producer. If you want to help make the Reason Roundtable happen every week, because say you're the sort of person who always listens to the very end, you can apply at reason.com/jobs. That's reason.com/jobs. Thank you so much for listening. Like the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the Reason Roundtable will return.